Without any further ado, then, I'm going to turn it over to you, Stan. Take it away. You do have share privileges if you have anything that you want to present. So you have that capability. And I'm seeing that fine. So, and again, if I could just ask everybody as Stan's going through his presentation to mute your microphones. It helps the presenter concentrate rather than hearing coughing or sneezing or that going on in the background. And of course, I'm sure Stan will entertain any questions that you may have as we go through too. So just unmute and ask away, I'm sure, but I'll let Stan deal with that. So with that, Stan, thank you very much. It saved me from having to put something together this morning, so I appreciate it. And again, the offer goes out to anyone. If you have anything you want to present, just let me know. It's wonderful. Over to you, Stan. Thanks, and I'll mute here.
Okay, thanks, Alan, and good morning to everybody on frequency, on Zoom frequency. This presentation I did to try to encourage students to get involved in ham radio and to also maybe think about radio communications. Some of the work that I did at the university had to do with magnetic fields. And of course, we're sort of on the edge of more low frequency work than high frequency, but it still sort of applies. But I thought I'd do this presentation for the students, and then now I adapted it for for Manitoulin Amateur Radio Club. And I am Stan Koren, Victor Echo 3 Papa Sierra Echo. I'm usually trying to be mobile as much as possible, so I'm somewhere between Sudbury and Coniston or out in the hills, maybe hiking with my backpacker radio. So intro on QRX, stand by for presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Morse code and telegraphy. So the beginnings of the electricity that had to get all the wires going to get Morse code going, and then moving into radio telegraphy and telephone and some of the technologies. And then I'll talk a little bit about my personal journey through being interested in shortwave listening and DX as well, and then moving into ham radio with HF and VHF radio and licensing, and I'll talk a little bit about repeaters and satellites, antennas, and a little bit on space weather, and then I'd like to do a software-defined radio demo at the end. So how it started with Morse, Samuel Morse from Boston, Massachusetts. He was coming back on a ship in 1832, and he ran into a physicist, Charles Jackson, and he showed him some of the work he was doing in electromagnetics in terms of being able to use a battery on a coil and make a little click and make something move. And something clicked in Samuel Morse's brain that day. He decided that he thought he could actually create some sort of communication device out of this. And you could see his two of the stamps commemorating him. Now, he looked at Morse code, and he did it, there was a method to his madness. He didn't just throw code out there and attach it to various random letters. He did what's called a concordance of the language. So you take a large body of work of text and you study it. And he found out that E and T were the most common letters in the English alphabet, and so he assigned E being the most common. He assigned the shortest signal, which was a dot, and the long signal to the T, which was a dash, because these were the most common letters. And then he worked down the tree, assigning more and more. So he actually thought about how this could be very efficient, and he really thought it well thought out, because it still survived to this day. So this is a basic system. It was set up so, of course, you've got your wire transmission, and then you use ground as a common, and you're able to communicate in two directions. I showed this picture because it reminded me so much. I'm forever in debt to the student teachers that showed up at our school, our primary school, and we had a number of projects to choose from that week, and one of them was a telegraph set. And went home and got a tin can and some wires, nails, all these parts, and I think we had to go to the hardware store to pick up some wire, but we got it working, and I can. I'll never forget having that basic telegraph set working, and it actually worked. So again, they used wire and they used the ground return. And now this led to telegraph offices and telegrams, and you could see a Morse code operator in the telegram office here, a historical photo. This photo, my uncle actually delivered telegrams in Sudbury. He dropped out of, oh my God, he dropped out of grade 7, I think, from St. David's School in Sudbury, became a telegram deliverer on bicycle, and he'd go 12 months a year in Sudbury on a bicycle delivering telegrams. And here's a sample telegram. And it got really popular, and I'm really thankful that we discovered radio waves, because look at this. This is an early scene in New York City with wires running every which directions. So telegraphy and telegrams took off in a big way. Now, I'll just talk a little bit about Sudbury. In this, where you can see my mouse here, this is the CNCP Telecommunications Building. And two very famous people met here. This is actually a project they were working on. They used to be a streetcar that brought you from downtown Sudbury to Coppercliff. And but that telecommunication building, it just seems like it's been here forever, and they really built it well, because it still looks the same as it did almost over 100 years ago. So these two guys met at that telegram office in 1923. I was sort of researching this and about telegrams, and this interesting story came out. And the author of the Hardy Boys, who's from up north in Tri-Town area, he moved to Sudbury, Leslie McFarlane, and he worked at Sudbury Star, but he ran into Ernest Hemingway, who was doing a story on, believe it or not, a coal deposit near to a nickel mine. And I actually did find that story. So I'm meaning to print that out one of these days and really look, get it kind of preserved. But the actual story that he sent back to the Toronto Star was posted. So they ran into each other at that telegraph office. And of course, Hemingway would be sending his dispatches to Toronto in those years, 1923, and the Leslie McFarlane would have been sending out telegrams as well. But I'll get into that in a second. So Leslie McFarlane, his name when he was writing was Franklin Dixon. That was his name that he used as his pen name. He would, as a Sudbury Star, I think he had this on the side. He had a side hustle, so he was really a modern guy. He would go down and watch the Sudbury Cub Wolves games at the old Ice Palace rink. I ran into one of my teachers from Sudbury Secondary. Actually, him and his brother, he said, "Oh yeah, we used to work there. We used to clean the ice." And I said, "Oh, did they have a Zamboni?" He says, "We were the Zamboni." So him and his brother would clean the ice in between periods and at the end of the game. But this was the Ice Palace rink in Sudbury, and he would actually go back to the telegraph office and send out a report, and there would be a number of people that would subscribe to this telegram, and they would actually get this telegram telling them what happened, what was the score, if there was any penalties, and he'd do that in the first period, second period, and then at the end of the game, and they would get that. And they'd actually announce these in restaurants and theaters. I think the police station would actually receive a telegram telling them, people who would have to work and couldn't go to the game, they would actually get these telegrams. His son, Brian McFarlane, he's a broadcaster with Hockey Night in Canada. For sure, you must have heard his name if you follow hockey. And he didn't actually know that his dad wrote the Hardy Boys until years and years later. So that's how much of a secret it was. But Brian also often says that his dad was one of the first pioneer hockey broadcasters in Canada, because he actually sent his reports through a telegram through Morse code. And while I was researching this, I also found another interesting fact was probably the first mention of Sudbury as being a moonscape by Leslie McFarlane. He described Sudbury in one of the articles that he wrote, a Wellesian vision of the mountains of the moon. So this is the 1920s. So this predates the Apollo astronauts visiting Sudbury. And of course, Sudbury became famous for being called a moonscape. And maybe we know now who did it. It was maybe Leslie McFarlane. So we'll move on to radio waves and James Clerk Maxwell. And he's from Edinburgh, Scotland. And his equations proved that radio waves could propagate through space, travel through space. And you can see here on the right, you've got E waves is the red, and the green waves are the magnetic field. So what his equations showed is that, an electric field, if you can get an electric field changing in time, that it would propagate, because electric field would rise, and then when it collapsed, the magnetic field would arise, and magnetic field would collapse and would give rise to an electric field. But you know, the equation is one thing, making a radio transmitter is another thing. Along came Heinrich Hertz, and he actually believed that light was an EMF, an electromagnetic field, you know, which was pretty revolutionary for the time. But of course, he couldn't, you know, experiment with light really, but he thought he could experiment with electric waves. And he created this 50 megahertz transmitter. It's a spark gap oscillator. So, you know, the size of this thing must mean something to do with the frequency, the distance between here, the two spheres here that spark. So he'd attach power to both ends, and the thing would oscillate at 50 megahertz. And then he created this a circular antenna with two spheres, tiny spheres, and they were very close together. And when they were in proximity, he was able to transmit a signal. So it was nothing really communication-wise. It was just like when that one was on, this one was on. And so it was more like a just very simple rudimentary communication device. I just want to mention Nikola Tesla because he got involved in a lot of this work, and he really started to believe that he could transmit power across distance, like, you know, usable power to run machines and that type of thing. However, he did patent a radio remote control device, which he proved that could work. And I believe he had a remote control boat that he put in the water, and he actually controlled the boat wirelessly, and he demonstrated this in New York, in Central Park in New York apparently. But he really got into wireless power. But I think a lot of the work he did, and you can see in the lower right, this is his lab outside there, and there he is reading where these sparks are going around. And I got inspired by a story when I was 11. I read a lot of science books when I was young, and I remember reading about him and talking about transmitting power, and it just made so much sense. And I think that was the first fuse I ever blew out in the house. I can remember trying to run this, my brother's old radio controlled, no, it's not radio controlled, sorry. It was just battery powered with I think they use air actually to control it. But I tried to wire up this coil to the power and thought I could send it across. And I just hear this yelling upstairs about the, you know, I saw this huge spark and saw smoke, and I heard some yelling upstairs, Stanley, did you do something with this? So that's probably the first fuse I burned out. But I was inspired by Nikola Tesla, so it wasn't a bad thing. And I survived, so that was the other part of it. So now we move on to Marconi, and Marconi. He was lucky because his dad worked with wires and batteries, and I don't know what his dad was doing with that. I think it was something odd, like he worked on a doorbell system or something like that, some remote buzzer system that he was working on. But he had access to wires and batteries, and so he set up this all these coils and was able to transmit signals as well. He basically this is a sort of a schematic diagram of what the Marconi transmitter and receiver look like. And again, they were using a spark gap as an oscillator, so you needed everybody seemed to know that you needed to change. You couldn't just use a DC field to send signals. You needed to actually have the signal changing over time. And so this is the receiver, and one important part of the receiver is the coherer, and they would have like iron filings inside a little glass tube. And so when the signal from here would hit the antenna, and the coherer would start to, the iron filings would all line up and they would conduct electricity. And of course, you see this is a battery here. So what ends up happening is once the coherer started conducting electricity, you'd get the coil would hit and you get a click on the annunciator. So this system actually, and the coherer would actually have a little hammer sometimes, so that automatically, I think occasionally what happened, it all got magnetized and they sort of had to tap it to get it going again. And this is one of the system is the one that was aboard the Titanic apparently. Canadian content. Reginald Fessenden, here he's commemorated on a Canadian stamp. He had the first transmission of speech by radio in 1900, the first radio broadcast of entertainment and music in 1906, which was really something revolutionary for that time to actually send music across the radio, and the first two-way radio telegraphic communication across the Atlantic Ocean in 1906. So he was an AM voice radio pioneer, and he actually worked on sonar as well. And I just love this picture. It's just crazy, just right into his work. He's got his lab book in front of him and all the equipment around him. And he was a Canadian. I believe he moved to the United States after to continue his studies in radio transmission. Gustav Eiffel's Tower, 1914. So it was set up originally to be a lab. So, and it was only supposed to be around for 5 years. So they set this up and they were looking at weather and all kinds of different scientific phenomena of the time. And they decided to work on radio and use it as an antenna. And I think that's part of the reason why it survived at that time. Apparently, at one of the legs at the base of the Eiffel Tower, there's still a radio studio in there. Uh, Another scientist, or who was an actress, and sort of an you wouldn't think that she would have made this in this area, but I guess she was intrigued by communications at the time. The war was going on. She was in some movies that had to do with, spies and that type of thing, and so she came up with this idea actually to actually have signal hopping. So you would have an asynchronous signal where you would have maybe 10 different frequencies, and the receiver and the transmitter would both be jumping between the frequencies, and you'd have a sync. I don't think they even had a sync pulse. I think you just kind of tuned until you lined up, and eventually they would be, you would be hearing the signal. So it was a matter of the transmitter was on, the receiver was on, and then you just sort of adjusted it until finally you can hear the signal, and then you were able to communicate. Apparently this led to secure radio, an idea on secure radio, and also the technologies in the 40s that led to Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth, which means that it was kind of a forerunner of digital communications, which is really amazing. I'll talk a little bit about some of the old stations. One of the first radio stations was this long wave transmitter in Luxembourg, 1933, and it's still on the air. And in my SDR demo at the end, I'm hoping to be able to tune them in, and we should be able to listen to Radio Luxembourg. BBC, of course, 1922. They're on 198 kilohertz on the long wave. Now, this long wave signal, because it has special applications to marine vessels like submarines especially, this long wave signal is very, very important for communicating emergencies. And so it's actually, this is part, the BBC longwave signal is part of the Royal Navy system, what's called letters of last resort. So if there's a catastrophic attack on Britain, submarine captains will check for a broadcast signal from Radio 4 on 198 kilohertz to verify, and this sounds pretty serious, annihilation of organized society in Great Britain. So apparently that's what the long wave is used as well, and we'll try to tune in that one as well. It's still on the air. And an interesting side story on this one is I've heard an interview with a ham radio operator from Britain, and he was talking. He was actually part of the Secret Service as well, but he was talking about how they used to send secret messages, and they would use BBC World Service, and they would play a certain song at the end of the show, and that song would be a signal in the code book on what they should do that day. But he said often what would happen is, the disc jockey, who wouldn't know why he was playing that song, he was just told to play, these are the songs you need to play. And at the end, he would look at the record and there'd be a scratch or something in it. And he'd say, well, he'd take another record that might be, about the same length and time, and he would play that record in time. And this fellow sort of joked that day, the wrong bridge got blown up. So it was actually some serious errors actually happened because of that. Hopefully not too many people lost their lives, or nobody lost their lives in those errors, but he was telling this story. It was an interesting application of broadcast communication. So we had RCI. Oh, RCI is gone. I used to listen to RCI. I used to love that sound. Oh, Canada, the little tone when they'd be tuning up the transmitter. And they were in, RCI was in Sackville, New Brunswick. And here's a picture of the antenna array that they had there and the transmitter. I heard this. There's a great documentary. It's called Spectres of Shortwave by Amanda Dawn. Christie, and it's a great film if you get a chance to watch it. They talked about the final transmitter tubes and how huge they were. Unfortunately, this transmitter actually got sold for $5,000 when the new owners took over the building, so that would have been a neat one to grab. But here's the finals, and so 5 kilowatts of power putting out by RCI, beaming across to Europe, of course, and all around the world. Vacuum tubes. Oh, wow. Vacuum tubes. I miss vacuum tubes. The warm glow, in the winter night listening to a radio and you can see the tubes maybe. This thing is called a Magic Eye. And I actually had a radio like that. My great-grandfather's radio had a Magic Eye. And of course, it was like a little phosphorus light. And when you tune the radio, you can actually see the lines moving together to make sure you were on the right frequency. But tubes seem to be almost like a work of art to me. Like it just seems to be we've lost something when we move to transistors, but we've gained something as well, though. Talk a little bit about transistors, solid state versus the tubes. So essentially, the tube has got a grid. Here, the dashed line, it's got a plate and a cathode and a heater. So what happens is the electrons flow across here on the big current flows through here, and a small current can control that big current. So that means that you're amplifying. If you move over to the transistor, and this is an NPN transistor, it's 3 layers, and this is charged negatively, this is charged positively, and this is charged negatively. When you put them together like that in a little sandwich, magic happens. These little barriers arise, voltage barriers, and you're able to have a base current controlling a collector to emitter current. This is the big current, this is the small current. So the small current gives you a big current. So you could take the output of a crystal radio, for example, and amplify it. So I don't know if you want to take a break now or just take a breather in terms of questions, if anybody's interested to ask a question. I'm just going to change sort of gears on the presentation now. If anybody has any question, I'll stand by for questions.
Was that a picture of George Orwell on the BBC site?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh my God, that could be.
I think it's George Orwell.
Oh my God. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Oh my God. He looked sort of familiar, but he looked really ominous in that photo. So maybe I can go back up to that one. Oh wow. Okay,
Yeah,
that could be
$1 a dollar. It's George Orwell.
Oh, cool. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, look at that microphone, eh?
That's a beauty.
Cool microphone. I wonder where those are. I hope they're in a museum somewhere because they're just amazing. So I have to add that as a note. George
I
Orwell.
think Brian Dixon has that microphone.
Is that right?
No, that was a joke.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, it didn't. This picture really caught my eye. So the person, obviously, yeah, it's a really well done photo. So for sure, it must have been somebody special, not you're just a regular guy. But when they were sending out those music pieces, I don't know. I guess the disc jockey didn't know. Nobody knew. But when they sent out these musical pieces, that they were a code, clever code actually. I thought to send out a musical piece as a code to their operatives, I guess, in the field in Europe, in war-torn Europe, I guess would be at that point. Okay, so I'll give it a couple seconds there if anybody has any other points or questions.
Michael just said it's definitely George Orwell. That same picture came up when he did a Google search on him.
Oh, decent. Okay, thanks, Michael, for checking that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Oh, yeah. It almost seems like his work, George Orwell's work, 1984. I guess these social movements happen in cycles, and it just seems like we're back to sort of a George Orwell type of state now. Well, maybe we've moved out of it now. I hope. We'll see what happens.
Good morning, everyone.
Great to see the pictures of the transmitter and the Art Deco sort of flashes on it, stuff of that vintage. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Like the stripes and the little pillars on the side. Definitely the style, then.
Oh yeah, Art Deco. Yeah, that's neat. Yeah. Yeah, it is a really nice unit, even though, yeah, and with all the meters. I miss all those meters, we've lost that as well. We don't seem to have
craftsmanship too. I mean,
I see when I worked at CFRB, and their transmitters, their 50 kilowatt transmitters looked somewhat like that. And it was all styled around that, that age.
Yeah, Art Deco.
Oh yeah. It's too bad we lost that transmitter. That was really.
I was told by one of my teachers that the word tubes in the transmitters he worked on that they had to get a technician to come in because you could let air into the tube and then you could walk into it, service the tube, close the door, and pump it back down. That's how big it was.
Oh, wow. Where was that, Claude?
I don't know, to be honest. I forgot. And unfortunately, he's not around anymore. He's a silent key now.
Okay. Yeah, I remember I listened to a radio documentary on RCI. Or I think it was on radio, but they mentioned RCI, and the fellow was just heartbroken that this transmitter wasn't going to be operational anymore. And of course, I think it's been recent. They've actually talked about some other transmission changes to RCI recently, and it's unfortunate because a lot of countries will stop the signal now because it's a digital. So, RCI could transmit on the internet, but, any country that wants to block them can block them. Whereas with this, you can't, the signal goes worldwide. And unless you jam the frequency, I've heard jamming of frequencies as well. So, but still, at least there's a chance to get out there to countries that maybe could benefit from, the knowledge in that. But I think going to the internet, we lose that. Okay, so maybe
Like Radio Free Elliott Lake.
That's good. That's a good idea. There you go. Radio.
Janice's pirate radio station.
Yeah, she's all set up to be a pirate, isn't it, with the parrot?
It's a bird, yeah.
Pirate radio. Radio station Cali. Pirate radio from Elliott Lake, yeah. That'd be awesome. Okay, so I guess I'll move on. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about my personal journey through ham radio, and I just wanted to start with a bit of kind of in pop culture. But this is a book that I read when I was quite young. Today I Am a Ham, and if you get a chance to give that to a young person as a gift that you'd like to inspire to study ham radio, is really an awesome story. He's in a family, and of course his father's a football coach, and his the focus is football, but he wants to be a ham radio operator, and it's a really nice story. This movie, if you get a chance to watch it with Doris Day, called Glass Bottom Boat, we actually after I did the presentation last year, I watched this movie. We watched it as a family, actually, and it is really good. It is really funny, and she gets caught up, accused of being a spy because she can communicate across town, and there's antennas by her house, and it's in the era, the spy era. So it really is funny, and of course, even in, even more recent ones, for example, in The Simpsons. So the genre, or the sort of the idea of ham radio exists in pop culture, not as much as it used to, but it was nice to see it in some of the shows, the more modern shows. And of course, how can you not be inspired by this radio and this this gentle giant Herman Munster working on ham radio? It's one of the episodes called If a Martian Answers, Hang Up, and I did watch that recently as well, and it is really funny. But I could remember watching this when I was a kid and being sort of excited about radio, ham radio. Oh, and he actually did have a call sign, W6XRL4. Apparently it was given to him as an honorary, I believe. I don't know if anybody knows more about that, but it's just a funny episode. So then I started into crystal radio, and in our house, we actually had an antenna wired up. We happened to move to a house when I was about 10 years old, and it had an antenna built into the attic, like a wire that was running all through the attic, and it was wired to some of the plugs in our house. So, half the plug would be power, and the other one would be this sort of a different type of plug, kind of a square with a slot, and one was ground and one was aerial. So I was able to actually hook up my crystal radio and listen to signals that way. And then later I experimented with long wave antennas as well. And then I got this for Christmas, probably around 12 years old, and started listening to stations from around the world and getting more involved in hooking up antennas and grounds and experimenting with, different types of antennas, and was able to tune up all kinds of stations around the world: Taiwan, Bulgaria, KBC Bulgaria, what else? Voice of America, of course, came in loud and clear. All India Radio, Radio South Africa would come in quite nicely, and Radio Havana, Cuba, it would come in loud and clear. And I got curious about this, and I went to a map, and you could see if they're beaming it to Florida in the United States, Sudbury's kind of just in that sort of the sweet spot. If you draw a line between Cuba and Florida and Sudbury, that's sort of why maybe we get the signal so well up there. But I would send out QSL verification cards. So I'd send a SINPO, it's a Likert scale, 1 to 5, and it would talk about the signal, the interference, the noise, the power, and the overall, and a bit of a program survey. And they often would send something back like a letter, verifying that I actually, got the station, and I'd be on their mailing list for future schedules. And here's an example of a schedule and what I received back. So I was listening on 11,760 kilohertz band. So it's all in Spanish too. So it's kind of neat. And these are some of the QSL cards I got. I snuck a couple in there that I don't have that I want to get. The ISS, of course, I haven't got that one yet. But South Africa, I've got a card from them. And this is actually, I became, I guess I was on their mailing list. And this is from Cuba. You can probably recognize that one. This is Cuban art. So, it was really a neat way to sort of travel from your armchair, so to speak. And I can remember coming home close to Christmas I went to Sudbury Secondary. Coming home from Christmas. I used to walk home, and it was around Christmas, and I got home and my dad said, "Stanley," and it's what? Castro sent you a Christmas card. And I'm like, what? And sure enough, there was a card from Havana, Cuba, and it was a Christmas card. So it was kind of neat. You really got connected. It was an early way of networking. It also connected with my love of stamp collecting, because there's a lot of stamps about radios as well. And those ones in particular, when I could get a hold of them, were really special stamps. And even look at, like, there's some with radio waves in them and telegraph keys from the Falkland Islands. So it was a really neat hobby. And scouts as well. JATA, Jamboree on the Air. I actually helped with one of those one year. We were able to set up at Willabosca and Windy Lake. We set up a station. I had a multi-band dipole and batteries, and we connected up with another troop, and everybody got a chance to talk to them. And at the end, one kid says, "Scott or Stanley, we don't have Wi-Fi out here. How did you do that?" I said, "Well, no, the signal, remember that part about the signal going up, and it's like a piano wire, and it oscillates at radio waves, and it goes up, hits the ionosphere, and comes back down? We don't need Wi-Fi." So, it's kind of neat. I may be inspired to continue with that. I don't think there are too many JATAs that happen. And got this old radio years ago. It's, what is it? Yeah, Drake TR4C and R4CB, I think it is, on there. I still have that radio. I'd like to get it going. And it ran off of crystals. So you could see the transmitter crystals in there to get your stations up and going, and made some contacts in the States, because my very simple dipole, 40-meter dipole, was oriented north-south. So at that time in the 80s, it was extremely busy in the States, and I had a hard time to break in to get a signal. But occasionally, I did get somebody who was mobile, actually. He was mobile in, I think it was in Boston. He said he had the Morse code thing on his leg, strapped to his leg. So that was pretty cool. That's what I moved up to now. This one is, this one's in the shop. I'm trying to fix it. It's all in pieces right now. I'm not sure what I did to it. This one here, I love this. It's a backpacker. I go mobile with that. This one has been really hard on batteries. Other than that, it's been a great radio. It's got all the different bands. This one here as well has all the different bands, which is incredible. You can listen to shortwave on it. What an amazing unit. The mic broke on this one, unfortunately, and I rebuilt it over COVID because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get one very fast. So I quickly built one out of an old headphone, and you can see a micro switch there, and I rigged up some sort of metal lever on there, and I was trying to get a volume control working with this gear, but I don't think it seemed to work for a while, but then I had to change it a bit. But it works. It got me back on the air, and I used this little DTMF keypad to even get me IRLP. I talked to a fellow in Port Alberni who worked with my uncle, Port Alberni, Vancouver Island. So it was kind of neat to be able to work that with a homebrew. I love that word, homebrew microphone. And that's what I'm working on next. I got this old Yaesu from a fellow at the university. I don't know if anybody remembers him. His name escapes me right now, but I'm trying to get an Arduino program, and I found some instructions on how to do that to actually give me the tone. But this Yaesu receiver works on RMI without the tone. We were in Manitoulin last summer, and I was listening, and I just for fun pressed the button. I didn't think I was going to get anything back because it doesn't have a tone on there, and RMI came back, and so I called CQ, and lo and behold, Rusty came back and connected and verified that I was in fact being able to talk. So I'm hopeful now to get it up and running. It's a really nice radio. It's probably 50 years old. A little bit about ionosphere. We all know about the skip and what happens with the sun during the day charges the ionosphere. So there's just too much noise to be able to do anything with it. But at night it gets quieter and you can bounce signals off and get DX happening. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the E layer of the ionosphere, which recently I read about. And when it charges up, and I guess it charges through the magnetic field, and this could have something to do with solar cycle 25 coming up, is that the signal sometimes will definitely bounce off of it, but sometimes what happens is it travels within that layer and then it comes out later down the line. So there's some thoughts that's why sometimes you get DX happening on the bands that you normally don't have DX, like VHF, so on those different frequencies.
I guess that's ducting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that makes sense. Ducting. That's a perfect term for it. Where the signal will bounce internally, and then eventually it'll bounce back out at a distance away. So you can start to get some pretty far communication.
I've seen quite a bit of that on 2 meters.
Really?
Yeah, like I remember in Jacksonville, Florida, one of the local repeaters heard it. I was in Orlando doing some training, and I heard the repeater from Jacksonville. I had a two-way conversation with somebody on it, and that's a couple of 100 miles away. And yeah, we kind of chalked it up to tropospheric ducting.
Okay. And now with solar cycle 25 coming up online, we may start to see more about that, because they said it's when it gets charged by the magnetic field in the article I was reading about that. So it could be exciting times. We may be able to make some long distance communication over VHF as well as 10 meter. I'm hoping 10 meter is going to open up. I want to get a 10 meter band.
Stan?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's Dennis here. The guy at Laurentian University, was it Joe Donato?
No, he was an anthropologist. He was an anthropologist.
Okay.
But Joe, I knew Joe, and yeah, he was often on his lunch hours. I'd be helping with some equipment or something like that, and he would, he would show me how the phone patch worked. Yeah,
the only two I know from Laurentian was Joe Donato and Reno that had ham licenses.
I remember who it was now, Ken Buchanan. That was his old radio, and he was an anthropologist, and he would be out in the field. He loved being mobile, because that was his work. He did a lot of work around this area, and I remember getting that radio from him so I could get on the nets there a long time ago in the 80s.
One more thing, the Herman Monster W6XRL4?
Yes.
It's on QRZ, and it's Herman Monster.
Really?
Yeah, California.
California, okay.
Yeah, Mockingbird Heights, California.
That's awesome.
Oh my God.
Hey, Stan.
Yeah.
I had one really interesting experience. It's in my logbook. I talked direct simplex to Petawawa from Garson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In the early days when I first started ham radio, all I had was VHF. Didn't have any HF privileges yet. And I'd go hilltopping and try to get long distance contacts on VHF.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, that was my pastime.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And on simplex, so you were like not even hitting. Well, yeah, I guess it'd be hard to hit a repeater. You wouldn't.
Well, you can. I mean, we first started talking. I was hitting a repeater in. Anyway, it was halfway to Petawawa, so we decided to try direct, and it worked.
Huh.
Like, this was an exceptional morning. It was early morning. It was kind of wet and foggy kind of thing.
Okay.
And once the fog dissipates, it's kind of gone.
Okay. Okay.
It's basically, Stan, it's called inversion. So what happens is you get a cold front and a warmer front that kind of creates two layers. And we'll find that in the spring and the fall, when you get the cold nights and the warmer days. And as Luke was mentioning there, we have two, well, RMI is on a frequency of 147.27, and there's two repeaters. One is located in Wisconsin, and the other one is in Toledo, Ohio. And what will happen is on the odd morning or something, I will hear the IDs of those repeaters coming through on our frequency. So it's it's called inversion, and conditions change. And since we've been running this daily, hams of the round table, we found that last year at a certain time, as soon as 11 o'clock hit in the morning, the signals would deteriorate, and that now that we have the new antenna and that with it, it's been much better. But yeah, you get different conditions, and of course the sporadic E and all those are quite interesting. So anyway, just thought I'd share that too.
Oh yeah, because you're more on the radio now, so you can hear that. And if you got the repeater on in the background, it's that's kind of neat that it actually would come in like that with the static and everything else that would come through there. What I've been doing is I've been listening to 740 AM from Toronto. They claim that their range goes up to Parry Sound, but we could get it inside. Some days it's almost like you're keeping your eye on the ionosphere, because because it's a constant transmission. So they're always transmitting 24/7 on Zoomer Radio. It's actually not a bad station, actually. They've got some old radio dramas on there, and Sunday night, big band Sunday night, which is, it's almost like if you put it on while you're, if it's coming through, it's almost like you've gone back in time, because they're playing all these old big band sounds from the, from the 20s and 30s and that type of thing. But occasionally the signal comes in so clear that I'm driving around Sudbury and I almost think I'm in Toronto. It's just so clear, the conditions are just right. And then some nights it's just, you can't even hear it. It's just complete static and that. But 740.
Stanley, what station are you talking about there?
It's Zoomer Radio in Toronto. They're on 96.7 FM in Toronto, but they also broadcast 740 AM.
Interesting. Did you know there was one shortwave station still broadcasting in the Toronto area?
No.
Well, in 1937, I think it was, the technicians, who were all hams who worked at CFRB, built a shortwave station. And originally the site was in Aurora, but it moved to Clarkson down on the lakeshore. And so it's 1 kilowatt. It's on 6.07 kilohertz, 6 megs, 6.07 megs. And it simulcasts CFRB. And originally it's got a couple, I think it's got a single vertical. It used to have two, but and they phased it to send the signal up north originally, and then later on they wanted to be able to send the Toronto signal to snowbirds in California. So if you were in Florida, you could listen to CFRB on shortwave, but it's still it's had a few new transmitters over the years, and it's only a kilowatt. So, but that's my wife and I both worked at CFRB, and because no one really at the station knew much about the shortwave. So one year we turned up at a softball game, and we got t-shirts with it's called CFRX, by the way, is the call sign. So we turned up with CFRX T-shirts, and everyone were accusing us of working for the enemy until we explained exactly what it was. But you might listen to that one.
Oh wow, yeah, I'm gonna, yeah, definitely. Oh, that'd be really neat to hear that shortwave station. So it's still going to this day.
Yeah, it's actually they've done a good job. They've actually got a website, so you can search for CFRX shortwave,
Okay.
and you can get a little bit of detail on it.
Wow.
But it's the only shortwave station in. I'm not sure if CBC ever broadcast shortwave in Ontario, but at one time it was the only shortwave in Ontario. I think it probably is still.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've not heard of too many shortwave station local ones. I remember VOA would come in really clear. Yeah. RFI. No, not RFI. Sorry. Radio Canada International (RCI) would come in really clear in Sudbury as well. But yeah, I don't remember ever hearing that one. Oh, I'm gonna have to try that. I'm gonna have to try that and see if I can hear that. Yeah, because I love listening to 640 and 740 AM, just because of the content they have on there. It's a lot of talk radio. There's a lot of they have different eras of music. They'll have specialty eras and things like that. And actually, in Toronto, it was funny. You could get FM. You can get Zoomer radio in Toronto on FM. But sometimes because I grew up with AM radio, sometimes FM just has too much information, and like I almost prefer listening to it on AM, even though the quality of the sound is different. It just seems it's a little bit easier to take in the background, and when you hear the sounds, maybe it's the nostalgia part of it that I grew up listening to AM, and FM just sounds like listening to a CD player as opposed to a radio station. Okay, so I'll continue. And so yeah, at night, this is a demonstration of what happens to the ionosphere at night and during the day. So there's a difference in height as well, and that could give you I think there's a possibility on the noise as well. During the day, you've got way so much noise on the ionosphere that you just can't get a signal through there. At night, it finally quietens down a bit, and you can get useful reflection without picking up too much noise. And I talk a little bit about amateur radio licensing in Canada. So you've got your basic, advanced, 5 words per minute, and now there's courses online. So when I did this presentation, there wasn't courses online, or not that many anyways. And the standards for radio stations, info on amateur radio service. So these are just reference documents, call sign policy as well. And talked about accredited examiners. And I'm happy to learn that Alan is an accredited examiner. So we have an examiner, and it sounds like you're doing quite a few, eh? What did you do? A few last weekend, I believe, Alan?
I did, yes. I've been extremely busy since last month. Al Penny, who is a director in Eastern Canada, was the instructor for the basic exam. And we have another director, Dave Goodwin, in New Brunswick, and he does the advanced. So they had 150 people originally sign up for the online for the basic course, and they whittled it down. I think by the end of the course, there was something like 80 to 100 people left, and my phone's been ringing off the hook. I average about 4 or 5 exams a week with people. So over the last month, so I've done about 20 or 30 hams over the last couple of months with that, and they've all done amazing. I mean, they're at home, they're studying and everything, and yeah, they go through the thing, and they're all getting basic with honors. Like they're all in the high 80s and mid 90s, doing just great. So yeah.
Oh wow, that's good to hear. So do you think it became a little bit more popular now that we have COVID?
Oh, absolutely. Our numbers, actually, we're bypassing the population increase, which is, I forget what percentage, 0.7 or 0.8 per year or whatever. And amateur radio is almost increasing at 2% per year.
What was the youngest you had, Al? I'm just curious.
Youngest fellow, well, what was he? I haven't had any kids yet on the online exams, but I've had like young fellas that are in university, you know, in their early 20s and that with it. They're probably the youngest that have been going through. I haven't had any teenagers yet or that, but I mean, prior to the COVID, yeah, we had a number of young people that went through. Rusty's a young lad. We had, I'd have to go back through the books over the years, but yeah, we've had young people go through on the island for sure. So it's good.
Oh, and this is people from the island or from Sudbury or from where?
They're from all over Canada. So what's happened is the rules with Industry Canada, or ISED Canada, it's Innovation Science Economic Development is the agency now. It used to be Industry Canada. Basically, as an accredited examiner, you have to belong to a certified club, and you have to be recommended amongst your club members to do that. And you can fill out a form and go through it. You have to be an advanced with Morse code capabilities to become an accredited examiner. And once you get the accreditation, basically you were only allowed to give the exams in your geographical area where you resided. So basically I was only supposed to do Manitoulin Island and the North Shore that covered our particular area. Sudbury has Steve Grecky is an examiner, and I'm not sure. Luke, are you an examiner?
No, not anymore. I was
Okay.
for
You were for a
several
while.
years,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
not anymore.
yeah. So there were people that looked after their own. I know for many years, there were people in Sault Ste. Marie and that.
I
But when
think John Harden is still an
yes,
examiner.
he's in St. Charles. Yeah, John's an accredited examiner and that with it. So what happened was when COVID-19 hit and that, and of course with the ability not to get together, which made it extremely difficult, they opened up the regulations a bit and allowed any amateur or accredited examiner that wanted to take on the testing component online using a two-way video conference, whether it be Skype or GoToMeeting or Team, the Net Team or whatever it is, or Zoom. And of course, being familiar with the Zoom and having a Zoom account, I said, well, I'd be glad to do it. So I've tested people from British Columbia to Newfoundland. So yeah, all over Canada, and it's kind of neat because you get amateurs, and I think we've got a couple connected that I tested. So what I'm actually doing is there's Michael on here. I think a lot of you I've probably tested in one capacity or another with it to go for your advanced or your basic. But what I'm also doing is I'm inviting amateurs to join us from all over the place that get their license and to learn about amateur radio and that. Even though this is based out of the Manitoulin Club, we invite people from all over, so it's great, and our numbers are growing. So that's a little bit more about that.
Comment?
Yes, go ahead, Marie.
Yes, we had a Clara member become a silent key, Merle, VE3 IVC or VCI from the Nova Scotia area has became a silent key. She was 93 or 95, I'm not sure which one, but she had taught fellas in the service many years ago. I don't know if it was WW1 or which one it was, but she taught them Morse code. And she was only about 17 or 18 herself. And this is what she had, and that was her job. She was teaching them Morse code so they could send code one way or another. Just a little info.
Oh, wow.
Check it out. It's VE3 VCI, Victor Charlie India, VE1. Okay, I'm out of here.
Oh wow, that's an interesting. Oh wow, teaching. So in the service, yeah, people needed to learn code. You know, I think I remember some people. I think my friend's father had mentioned he had learned code and was a telegraph operator for a while in Sudbury at the station there. So come to think of it, it was a skill that people did learn. And oh yeah, recently there was a railway show in Sudbury, and friends of ours, their father had known about Morse code, and they had set up this neat device. I think he was a railroader. I think, you know, he was a telegraph operator for CNCP, maybe in Sudbury. I have to ask them where he had done that, but he had a setup where he could, they wired up this Morse code key, and it was actually the enunciator. It wasn't like a tone or anything like that. It was a mechanical enunciator, and they had a modem on this board, and he'd take the phone and he'd put the phone on like the old-fashioned modems, and somebody at another end would actually do the same, and they were able to communicate through Morse code. So he was probably in his 90s at that time, and you know, he wasn't an amateur radio operator, but he was able to do this and talk to people. And it was at the railway show in Sudbury. You know, I think they had a yearly model railroad show, and he was there every year for that demo. And so he was clicking away, and you could actually see the enunciator clicking away as well on there. I don't know if they still have that system available. I guess as people lose it, but it seemed to be a standard system at that time. Okay. Oh, it's great to hear there's more ham radio operators. That's going to be wonderful. Yeah, it was. It's good to hear that you know, that the hobby's still alive and doing even better now. So that's nice to know. Okay, so just talk a little bit about repeaters, and you know, I gave some examples to the students about the local repeaters, Manitoulin, RMI, and SRG in Sudbury. Oh, the CN Tower. I whenever trying to get in, whenever I'm in Toronto, I try to hook up to the tower repeater. They've had some issues in the past, sort of people abusing that repeater, unfortunately, but it's back. It seems to be back on air. You can actually pick it up on the Broadcastify, and sometimes I listen to it on Saturday nights because they have a science and tech net, where they discuss all kinds of things from antennas to science to communications to, you know, like a couple of weeks ago, it was just incredible. He went through about 5 different, I think they had a physicist on there, and he was talking about all these different things from black holes to time travel to everything under the sun. So it was kind of neat to hear that one. And of course, all our other options now, digital options that we have. Quindar tone is something that we've all heard, and let's see. Maybe I'll just stop sharing for a second. I'll just put on the Quindar tone, because if you hear it, you'll know what it is. Share screen. So I'll just share the sound. Hopefully, it doesn't cause any problems with the echo. So the Quindar tone actually had some method behind it, and it had to do with the repeaters, actually. So the repeater system. So you can imagine they were using repeaters in communicating to, you know, the LEM, lunar module, and they would be communicating as they were out in the field back to the LEM and between each other. But there was a repeater there, and that's what we ended up hearing in those communications. And the tone has become really iconic in, let's see if I got it here. Let's see if I can play that for you.
T-minus 10, 9, 8. We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So I think there's one at the end as well. That iconic tone has, you know, like really, when you hear it, you know right away, you think of Apollo missions. And apparently Elon Musk was using that as well on SpaceX. So he brought that back. So he must have felt the same sort of nostalgia towards that tone. And the tone actually would control, you know, they'd have a detector to pick up the tone and actually have it turn the repeater on and off. So it's you know, there's complexities in terms of how it worked, but it worked, and it became sort of it became the character. And I remember Alan was talking about this last week. You know, different repeaters have different characters because they have different tones and different types of messages and things like that. And it sort of helps to identify a repeater. When you hear it, you know right away it's RMI, or it's SRG, or it's the VE3 on the tower in the CN tower. But it seems to have that part. It adds character, anyways. But in this case, it actually has a lot of functionality as well. But I know with time delays in terms of digital, sometimes maybe these tones can help us to not. I know, I've been in many Zoom meetings over the last year, and it's really a problem where, you really have to count 1001, 1002, 1003, and then you talk, because otherwise sometimes you're going to speak over other people. But maybe the tone can help to solve that problem. Oh yeah, these are, okay. So some of the AMSAT satellites, I'd really like to start to work. And the CubeSats, which I believe we have somebody from Indiana on board that worked on these CubeSats. I call them a repeater and a really good QTH, really good QTH. And, these are some of the examples. I find it amazing that when I found out there's a Doppler shift on these frequencies. So if you're trying to connect to the International Space Station, as it's coming at you, the signals are going to be compressed together. As it's over you, you're going to get the right frequency. And as it's leaving, the signals are going to be pulled apart. It's a Doppler shift. And you would never think that would happen with radio waves, but I guess it's traveling so fast. So you imagine you're trying to do dual band, and you're trying to compensate for the frequency shift and the things moving. So, it's really nice if you can have something automated to do that. I've tried to connect many times. I've heard recently that there's a problem with the coax going to the antenna from the repeater, and they replaced it, but it's still an issue. So that might take a while to get back. But there's a lot of other satellites to choose from. And of course, now with the internet, we could find out exactly when the satellite's going over. And I spoke with a ham radio operator in Michigan, Minnesota, sorry. And he was telling me that he had a system that just he just punches in he calls them birds. I love that. He says, yeah, I just punch in the bird into my computer, and the antenna tracks it across the sky, and it takes care of all the frequencies and everything. I'm like, whoa, that sounds nice. I'd like to get one of those systems. That'd be really cool. Talk a little bit about antennas, and if you remember the old rabbit ears from they're gone. I miss them too. Seeing rabbit ears is pretty cool. I can remember this is what it looked like too. You just have to stand in the right area, and people would put tin foil on their antennas, and they'd be taped up trying to get the signal.
Engineering change.
Yeah, that's right. But perhaps, sometimes that tells you that maybe it's not such a simple science, antennas, and it definitely is not. But we don't see antennas on cell phones anymore. I'll talk a little bit more about that after. But, this is your basic rabbit ears, antenna arrays, and there's a Yagi. Oh, an antenna farm. There you go. Every ham's dream is to have one of these, an antenna farm. And a little bit of fractal antennas, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in the next slide. Oh no, it'll come up later. And of course, SWL antennas, these are the ones that I used to set up, and you wanted your spark, you want to take care and make sure that you're well grounded, so if there's lightning issues, you're not going to have a problem. Simple antenna, but it works quite well on shortwave. Basic dipoles and Yagis. Essentially, you're having, your half wave, so your impedance is, you don't have your short circuit for the current in the middle. It's it's at the end, so that's that's sort of the reason that it's a half wave dipole. And now you can get some sort of idea of what the radiation patterns look like as well. And Yagi, that's the one I use in the field. It's my Arrow antenna. I really like this antenna. It's really portable and light and everything else, and it's got dual band on it. I'll tell you a story. The first time I used it, I went out to a place in Long Lake, and I was connecting to RMI, and I connected up with Rusty, actually. Rusty was driving at the time, and he says, you're doing something wrong. There's something wrong because your signal's not coming in very good at all. And so we talked a little bit, and I tried this on my radio, and I tried that on my radio, and I tried aiming the antenna different and everything else. And then Rusty says, wait a minute. He says, how do you have that thing oriented? And, I said, well, like flat, like a TV antenna. He says, oh, he says, turn it the other way, turn it vertical. And I turned it vertical. And I just hear back from Rusty. He says, geez, what'd you do? You just about blew the speaker out of my radio, like after that. So after that, I realized the importance of having the antenna oriented perfectly. I mean, all my life I've seen these Yagis up in the air and they're all horizontal, right? But in this case, I needed the vertical. So. And of course, they're used in the field. So I've helped people, biologists, with this, setting up their radios, making sure they're working well to track animals. And it's clever what they do. I mean, they can use different frequencies, but they can also use different pulse lengths and speeds, where the pulse is fast, and that's animal 1, and pulse is a little bit slower, that's animal 2 and animal 3. So they're able to actually track these animals in the field. Lately, they've been using satellites a lot more. But I think this is still, one of the very economical alternatives to tracking animals. And of course, you could see the small Yagi antenna that this wildlife officer is using in the field. A revelation. Every once in a while you get a revelation, you get a eureka moment. And we were down in Florida at Cocoa Beach, and there was a satellite. We got on the beach to watch this satellite launch, and of course I'm always thinking about ham radio and communications and how they're tracking it and how they're communicating with it. And my brother-in-law was walking on the beach, which was wet, and I thought, oh my God, that's what they're talking about when they're talking about quarter wave verticals. And it just occurred to me that, there it is. There's the virtual antenna. So there's the reflection. So, I mean, it's an analog, but it still gives you an idea that, if you could see an RF, and this is, a diagram of that, because I've always wondered why they had a quarter wave as opposed to a half wave, but then you realize that there's a mirror image below. And I thought this picture just illustrates it perfectly, that you've got a half wave out of a quarter wave. And Make Magazine, if you check out Make Magazine, especially for young people, I think it's all ages. They've got everything from low-tech projects to high-tech projects. Like there was this neat thing where you just cut out these wood cubes and you hook them all together with you could use tape, or you could get more fancy, but you could essentially have something like 8 different pictures as you fold the different cubes in different ways. So they go back to old tech, but they go to high tech. And so in this example, this what would you call them? Not amateur radio operator, but they're more like an amateur scientist, I think, and they're hobbyists as well. But this magazine comes out of California, and they do have ham radio projects in there, and they use microcontrollers, and this is where I first found out about 3D printers and that type of thing. So it's a really good magazine to get in touch with. But in this article, she had made this Yagi out of, you could see it's homemade, and she was able to hook it up to a radio and listen to satellites on it. So, I mentioned earlier about fractals and how fractal antennas, and how, you don't see an antenna on top of cell phones anymore. And this all started with this fellow Mandelbrot. And I actually saw him do a presentation at Laurentian University years ago. And he discovered that this very, very simple formula, it's like, it looks way too simple to be able to generate something so complex. But this very, very simple formula would generate this entire fractal here, the one in the lower right. So just by using this, but there is a trick. There's on the y-axis, you're talking imaginary numbers, like square root of -1 type of stuff, and then on the horizontal axis, it's real numbers. And when you plug this into here, you keep going around in a loop with these numbers, and you test the point. And if the point is in the set, you plot it. If it's not, you throw it away. But he came up with this idea to say, okay, well, how much is it not in the set? So if it does 100 loops and then it throws it out, then it applies color 100 to it. So at the beginning, it was a very simple shape. And I've run computer programs that run overnight to generate things like this when I first started, like an old computer. And it would take like almost 24 hours to actually generate the thing because there's so many loops, even though it's a very simple formula. But if you zoom in on it, it has endless it just goes off to infinity. It just keeps on. Like if I zoom in like here, for example, you'll get a brand new shape and colors and everything else. So essentially it sort of mimics a complex infinite coastline, and it sort of mimics nature. So fractal antennas. So these are the old phones with the antennas there, and these are the new antennas where you actually use a fractal as the antenna. And this is an example on a printed circuit board. And this is an example of an actual fractal Yagi on the lower right that does that. And this diagram with the triangle, this is called the Sierpinski gasket. And you know, it's a very simple one. You could actually make this on a piece of paper. You just keep on making smaller and smaller triangles, and then as you go, and it goes off to infinity, and it becomes almost like a snowflake in a way. But you could see part of the reason that this works is because it is resonant on many different frequencies. So these are wideband antennas, and it's incredible what they've been doing with the fractal antennas. Oh boy, Starlink. Okay, Starlink. I saw these pictures and I said, what's going on here? You know, every satellite dish I've ever seen in my life has a low noise amplifier or receiver at the focal point. And this is Algonquin Park, Lake Traverse. They have a 46-meter dish there at Lake Traverse. I visited there actually years ago when I first graduated from electronics.
I used to work there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
When I first got out of school.
Wow. What did you do?
I was part of the control system group. Keep the thing pointed in the right direction.
Oh my God, that must have been an incredible place to be. Eh?
I learned a lot.
Yeah. Were you in for 6 weeks and out for 6 weeks, or is that how that worked?
Well, it was pretty easy going. As long as you had your minimum hours in for the month, they didn't care. As long as it was always one person out of the group on site at the time.
Okay. Oh, neat. And you must have met scientists from all over the world coming to...
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, because the astronomers had come in from mostly Ottawa, but we had people from all over the place.
Oh, wow. Oh, that must have been a really interesting job. I visited there. This is a very impressive looking radio telescope. It's huge. 46 meters. It's humongous.
Yeah, it's 1,000 tons.
1,000 tons. Wow. Wow. Part of my
and
job.
They can keep that thing pointed to plus or minus 15 arc seconds in a high wind. When it gets too windy, they have to shut it down. But you know, the usual kind of wind that we get there, it's still plus or minus 15 arc seconds.
Okay. Okay. Incredible. Oh wow. So you work there. That's really neat. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about that one day, more about your work there, because when I visited there, I think I met an astronomer. Yeah, he was from Czechoslovakia, and it actually was before Czech and Slovakia separated. And he said, "Oh, you know what we're looking for?" And I said, "Well, ET." And he says, "Yeah, we'd love to get a signal from extraterrestrials, but we're actually mapping the hydrogen near the Andromeda galaxy right now." And so he told me about that story of how they map hydrogen, which is a whole other story. But essentially, hydrogen pops every 10 million years, and when it pops, it puts out a 1.4 gigahertz signal. And it pops when I say pop, it changes its spin direction, and every 10 million years it does that, a single atom. But there's so many of them that you can actually pick up the signal, because they're at any given time there's lots of them popping, and they actually put out that 1.4 gigahertz, which gives you sort of a method to map the universe. But I was going to talk about Starlink because every satellite dish I've ever seen has a receiver at the focal point. And when I saw the Starlink, I said, "Oh, okay, what the heck is going on here?" Because and this is a Starlink satellite, and this is the dish, and there's nothing at the focal point. And I thought, what did Elon Musk, did he make it invisible, at a clear plexiglass or something? Knowing him, he would do something like that. But after doing a little bit of research on it, I found out that it is essentially a fractal antenna. And the way that they set it up is they set it up, it looks to me, it's like almost like a Yagi, a multi-layer Yagi fractal, and it's incredibly complex. I don't know who designed it, but you do not need the focal point. It actually, the whole thing is an antenna. Has anybody heard anything about how the Starlink dish works? No way. Okay, so it likely is a fractal antenna. Basically, from what I've seen, somebody tore one down and did a video on it, so you can check that online. It looks like some sort of fractal antenna, so it definitely does not have a focal point receiver. The entire dish is an antenna in its own right. So some mysterious design that they came up with at the Starlink or Elon Musk's company.
I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take mine apart. I'm using it.
Don't take it apart. Yeah, I don't think you can get it back together by the looks of it. Okay, so just talk a little bit about solar weather and how it affects us. And this actually goes back to the old telegraph wires. You can see all the telegraph wires here. In 1859, September 1st to 2nd, there was a huge solar storm, and it was recorded by British astronomers Carrington, Richard C. Carrington, and Hodgson. And the storm caused strong, like the northern lights really were quite bright, but telegraph systems were fairly new at that time, and all the telegraph systems were burning out. They were burning out coils, there were repeater stations all across. So you can imagine that there was thousands of miles of wires crossing everywhere. So they estimate that this is a strength 1600 to 1760 nanotesla. So it's quite a strong storm, solar storm. And this is a sketch by Carrington of the actual sunspot that they believe caused this event to happen. So this is sort of the first disruption of modern communications by a solar storm. And this actually, the maximal usable frequency map is available online, and it tells you a little bit about what's happening with the ionosphere and with the space weather at the time. So you can see that these are contour lines connected to the frequencies, different frequencies in the different areas. So this can help you if you're trying to work on a contest. And Igor introduced this map to me at one of his presentations. So very appreciative to find out about it. Excited to explore it more. So thanks, Igor. Schumann resonance, one of our students actually set up a receiving station for the Schumann resonance at the university, and he wired up, oh my God, he had so many connections. I remember at his thesis defense, his dad was there, and his dad helped him do all the winding, and I can't remember how many kilometers of wire they put on that thing. It was incredible, but I just remember his supervisor giving his dad a high five on that at the thesis defense. But he actually was able to measure these different frequencies. So what ends up happening is, because of the way the ionosphere is, you end up with this electrical cavity, and you get lightning strikes, and that's feeding the sort of the EMF. So a lightning strike will give radio frequency across a wide band, and then it starts ringing the bell essentially, and the whole Earth will ring at its fundamental, which is 7.83 hertz, which is quite low. The wavelength's 43,000. 43,000 kilometers, and then of course you get the harmonics after that, 14 and 20 hertz as well. So this was an interesting experiment, because he was looking at connections of Schumann resonance and animal behavior at that time. And of course we have space weather, so we can check out what's happening with our solar. I like to listen to that AM radio station for Toronto. It's like, what's happening with the every day I tune in and see what's happening with the ionosphere. This station in Finland has been around for, I think, 100 years, and they're one of the oldest observatories of magnetic storms in Finland, Oulu, Finland. A friend of mine actually has a cousin who works there at this northern site, and they've been collecting geophysical data, especially geomagnetic data, for a long time. So if you ever want to see what's happening with the solar storm, you can go there and you can see a chart. So for example, here's an example of some of the data from there. Oh yeah, and we had an event, Hydro-Quebec. The Carrington event I mentioned earlier was about 3 times more intense than the March 1989 storm, and it actually knocked out the Quebec's power grid. And in 1989, so because the power grid in Quebec has such long transmission lines, they were very, very susceptible to getting hit by a magnetic storm. So that actually happened in 1989. And this is actually a chart of that. So you can see all these lines here. So normally, it's fairly quiet, and then all of a sudden that storm hit. And a lot of times it has to do with the onset time. If the rise time is very fast, you're going to do a lot of damage. during that storm, it actually affected the satellites as well. So they said that a couple of the communication satellites tumbled out of control for a couple hours. Discovery, the space shuttle was up there at that time, having some strange problems happening with some of the sensors on board with one of the fuel cells. So, and then it just went away as mysteriously, they said, as it started, and it was during that solar storm. Space weather. Somebody's come online fairly recent who has specialized in space weather. Tamitha Scove from California. She calls herself Space Weather Woman, and she specializes in radio propagation and northern lights. And she actually has a broadcast. It's almost like a weather broadcast, but it has to do with solar storms. So if you're interested in keeping in touch with the, it seems to be more of a common thing. People are interested in it. It's causing issues with GPS. Oh, does anybody hear about problems with GPS on aircraft? Because I noticed on some of these weather forecasts that they say that some of the space storms can actually cause problems with GPS on Earth and with aircraft. Okay, nothing heard. Maybe we could talk about that later. And then, of course, Echolink is our digital connection. And software-defined radio. This system here, which is neat, I'm going to try to give a demo on that. There's a lot of them all around the world. You can connect up through your computer and actually tune actively, even though multiple connectors are multiple people are connected to this receiver. It allows many people to tune to their own independent frequency because of the magic of software-defined radio. And what's nice, you usually can see this waterfall, and sometimes you can actually see the Morse code signal in the waterfall. It leaves a trace, which is kind of cool. Slow scan TV. I noticed on the SDR they actually have an option to actually decode slow scan TV. So, and slow scan TV uses audio frequencies and for the different colors, so it scans across, and it scans like an old-fashioned raster TV where it scans from the upper to lower, and you can actually produce an image through HF. And that's it. Conclusion. So I spoke to you about Morse code telegraphy, how it moved to radio telegraphy, some of the technologies, SWL and DX, repeaters and satellites, a little bit about antennas, and space weather. And now I'd like to do, if there's any questions, I'll entertain those, or I'll do a quick SDR demo.
We were told by a fellow that's going to be teaching us everything we need to know about boating and navigation. And he was saying that the Garmin, the GPS navigation can get whacked out every so often when you're out boating around, and you have to learn how to deal with that if you lose everything. So I guess it's a common thing with GPS. Tamitha Scove always does a section in her report about GPS and whether or not you're going to have good luck with it or not. I don't know. It's all magic to me, but sort of interesting that it can get knocked out so easily.
Yeah, and I think I've heard as well it could give you erroneous, like it could give you the wrong location. So it could move you 100 meters off of the map, and 100 meters in a boat could be big trouble because there could be dangerous shoals or whatever.
So I guess that's part of what we're going to get taught about and how to deal with it if and when it happens. So yeah, just interesting.
And now that we're moving towards that solar cycle, so that's that could be a problem. Yeah. Okay, so this radio that I hook up to, I found out it's actually at the University of Twente, and I don't have a speech impediment there. That's actually the University of Twente, and it's in Enschede in the Netherlands. And let's see if I can fire it up there and get some different frequencies on here. Oh, there we are. So that's the actual radio, and I'll try and bring up one of the frequencies. I've got them listed here. So let's try Radio Luxembourg at 230 kilohertz. Let's see, might have to refresh that. Okay. And you can see the waterfall. Going. I like this one because it always seems to be open, and they seem to have a lot of open channels that they allow. So. Oh yeah, I'm on USB.
Avec un doigt dans le cul pour pas couler.
Mais ça va pas, comment tu parles, Ariel, ça va pas.
Laurent, ça me choque. On ne parle pas comme ça à notre princesse. C'est ma princesse, c'est mon amour. Qui n'a pas d'annure, rappelons-le.
Évidemment, c'est une sirène.
Ah, c'est ça l'odeur.
Non, mais...
So it's an interesting channel. It seems to have a lot of animated speech going on, and you can definitely pick up the accent, from Luxembourg. And Luxembourg actually has something. The station had something to do with the royalty of Luxembourg because it's its own country. So, were you saying? Yeah, and that is one of the oldest radio stations in Europe. So let's see, what else do I have here? Okay, BBC 4 at 198 kilohertz.
Away the body coat. I remember certain things like the feeling of Dr. Baskey basically entering the abdomen with a telescope. And then the only other thing that I really remember is the feeling of the amniotic fluid literally dripping down my side, which was, again, unbelievably surreal.
So the interesting thing about this is that I guess when you listen to the station on the internet, somebody knows you're listening to it on the internet. So I suppose in countries where, the internet's blocked and that type of thing, to certain stations, it's pretty hard to block this because there's really no definite frequency that's coming out of there. Let's see, we've got Deutschland Funk from Germany, 153 kilohertz. Okay, and what I find really neat is the okay, let's see if I can get this up and working, if it's working today. Oops. So what that is it's a Bottrop non-directional beacon in Germany. So this is an airport, and this is the non-directional beacon setting out the Morse code identifier BOT for Bottrop in I don't know if you could see it right there. It's hard to see actually, but there's if you look at the waterfall, you can actually read the Morse code right off the waterfall. They're like long and short on there. And then of course we can go to the 20-meter band in shortwave or 14 megahertz.
Sudbury's got its own navigation beacon on 362.
Sorry, what frequency in Sudbury?
362.
Okay. YSB?
It comes out SB.
Oh, SB. Okay. Okay. Ah. There's a story about the rock band Rush. They have a song called YYZ, and they were flying back to Toronto, and they were listening to the non-directional beacon because the pilot, they were in a small plane, and they were coming back from a concert. And as they got, I don't know how many kilometers away, the fellow put on the NDB radio, and he was listening to it, and the drummer Neil Peart said, eventually, after listening to that for about 20 minutes or whatever, he says, "What is that?" And he says, "Oh, that's home." He says, "That's home? What do you mean home?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "That's the beacon from Toronto. They're sending out their home signal. So as we get closer, it gets louder." And so Neil Peart listened to that thing, and he wrote sort of a drum solo, basically sending out YYZ in Morse code based on that sort of experience. So if you listen to YYZ, it's a rock band, it's a song by the rock band Rush. At the very beginning, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to drum out YYZ in Morse code. So I'm up in it's pretty noisy up there. Oh, there's a few signals. Maybe you can get something. So I think that sort of gives you a flavor of this. And, you know, if you're kind of, there's a lot of different ones around. This one is my favorite one in 20, because I learned about it when it was the first station I learned about, but they seem to be the most reliable. I've connected to other ones that don't come on like at sometimes, but yeah, so that's it for my presentation.